Hey guys, Mike again at the Pop Culture Playhouse, and welcome back to another installment of the Blu-ray DVD Weekly Wrap-Up. I have another great stack of titles to discuss with you guys this week, including the highly anticipated Scarlett Johansson star Under the Skin, the 20th Anniversary Special Edition of Invasion of the Scream Queens, the first 2 seasons of the Tim Allen ABC sitcom Last Man Standing, Season 6 of NYPD Blue available from Shout Factory, and more. So sit tight and we'll be back in just a second. Alrighty guys, and welcome back to this week's installment of the Blu-ray DVD Weekly Wrap-Up. The first title, or titles rather, that we're going to take a look at is Tim Allen's return to network television. So that's right, we're going to take a look at the complete first and second seasons of Last Man Standing. Since debuting in 2011 on the ABC network and just recently renewed for its 4th season, Last Man Standing is truly Tim Allen's return to network sitcoms, kind of treading on similar water that he rode in the 1990s with the success of Home Improvement. Now, I remember when this show had just been announced and it was kind of, making its way to ABC. I was actually on vacation in Disney World, and I remember seeing advertisements all around for this, and I kept making mental notes to, telling myself to really tune into this, because if you were a kid in the 1990s growing up with TGIF and all the great, Disney films that Tim Allen put out in and around that time, Tim Allen was a big comedy staple for you. So, seeing Tim Allen making a big return to, network sitcoms was really high on my radar, and I kept meaning to check it out, but, years went by and I still had yet to check this one out. But luckily, 20th Century Fox is putting these out on manufactured on-demand releases, available exclusively through Amazon.com. And now, I'm not a huge, I'm not a huge supporter of mod-type releases. I just really prefer press releases. It is really cool to check out, seasons of this show in their entirety, since, I completely missed, the formation of this show back in 2011 onwards through its 2nd and 3rd seasons. But, like I mentioned earlier, Last Man Standing kind of finds Tim Allen treading on similar water that he found himself in with Home Improvement. It's kind of a bit of a role reversal of sorts from Home Improvement, where in Home Improvement, Tim Allen's character was this really big macho guy, and he had his own, Tool talk show, and he had 3 boys, and his wife was kind of like the lone woman in the house. And while the show didn't, tend to kind of focus directly on that, of course, that's really what you find in Last Man Standing. In this show, Tim Allen is a marketing director for an outdoorsy, type of manly man catalog, if you will. And he's actually surrounded by his wife, who's played by Nancy Travis from 3 Men and a Baby, and So I Married an Axe Murderer, who is an actress that I loved in the 90s. I just haven't seen her in anything in years, so seeing her attached to this show was a real treat. So, of course, he's surrounded by his wife and 3 girls of various ages. His oldest one has a baby of her own. You have another one high school age, and then one that's about middle school age, like 13, 14. So it's a bit of a role reversal of, Tim Allen being this macho-esque guy and constantly surrounded by this world of women and, everything kind of, a feminist kind of twist being, shoved down his throat day in and day out. But it's a lot of fun, and while a lot of people kind of find this show a little dated and kind of treading on things that aren't really relevant anymore, this is exactly the type of show and sitcom that I've been yearning for on network television today. You just don't see fun family, situational comedies like this anymore. And yeah, I do agree that it definitely feels a little out of context in, today's society. It definitely feels like a scenario that you would find in the 1990s, but I think that that's the real charm of Last Man Standing, especially if you like Tim Allen and Home Improvement. This is something that I think appeals to, a lot of people that are in situations like this where, a man is just surrounded by a family of women, or, a woman surrounded by a family, full of men, or what have you. But it's things like that that kind of, lend itself to a lot of fun situational comedy, in a half-hour time slot. So I found a lot to enjoy in this. And another thing that I do want to make note of is really the unsung collaboration between Tim Allen and director John Pasquin. Now, when you think of actor and filmmaker collaborations, you really think of big ones like De Niro and Scorsese, or Tim Burton and Johnny Depp. But Tim Allen and John Pasquin are 2 people that have been working together for countless years, dating back all the way to Home Improvement. Them 2 made the Santa Claus together, Jungle to Jungle. a slew of other pictures, so their collaboration has really, lasted the test of time for the better part of 20 years, and, John Pasquin is a director that, really worked his way up the ranks in network television. He, has directed so many great episodes of shows, including Growing Pains. He actually shot the pilot to that episode, moving on to things like LA Law, shooting countless episodes of Roseanne, so tons and tons of stuff on there before, he really kind of found his gel, with Tim Allen, and then of course kind of making his leap into feature filmmaking with the Santa Claus. So I really think that these two guys really have something special between them, and all of their projects really speak for themselves. They're staples of the 1990s, and just really great comedy work from that decade. So it's a real thrill to kind of see them working together again in this one. John Pasquin actually produces this series, and interestingly enough, he directed every single episode of the first and second season, which is pretty rare in this day and age. I mean, you really see various directors, directing, several different episodes at a time on a season. So it's pretty rare in this day and age that you see one director kind of sit through, two seasons straight through. So it's really cool to kind of see that collaboration and, that chemistry kind of thrive throughout 2 whole seasons. It wasn't really until the most recent season where John Pasquin wasn't really, he was directing just as much, but there are a few episodes that he didn't direct. And this show is a lot of fun. After the first season ends, heading into season 2, there are some cast changes, but it doesn't really deter from the show itself. There's just some cast changes that are made. Some characters are aged a little older. Most noticeably, Tim Allen's oldest daughter's son. He's a little bit older than a toddler at this time. And you also get some cool episodes, including some home improvement vets, which is pretty exciting stuff and really, really memorable episodes. So, like I said, guys, if you're a big fan of Tim Allen and have been awaiting his long return to network television, then definitely scoop up the complete first and second seasons of Last Man Standing. I had a great time with this one, and I really hope to kind of check this one out once the new 4th season debuts sometime in the near future. So, as I said, these are manufactured on-demand releases that are available exclusively through Amazon.com. So, if you're a big fan of stuff like this, so I would definitely check it out. They're available right now. Alrighty guys, and next up, continuing with some more television madness, available right now from Shout Factory, is the complete 6th season of NYPD Blue. Of course, focusing on the fictional 15th Precinct in Manhattan, this deals with the internal and external things that go on within this precinct of, various police officers. This was a huge hit when it came out, lasting for a whopping 12 seasons, and since taking the reins over of the show, beginning with season 5, Shout Factory has done a tremendous job continuing all of the seasons. They've, of course, now put season 6 out, and they've already stenciled season 7 for a release this September 30th. So it's a really great show. If you're a big fan of cop dramas, this is definitely, I would argue, probably in the top 5 of all time. It's phenomenal, great stories, great acting in this one. Every season just gets more and more intense, but in particular, season 6, some really, really heavy stuff goes on in it. Dealing with a certain cast member that doesn't come back, and a new detective filling in his role. There's also a very dramatic drug overdose of another said character. As you can see that there's a lot of very heavy and dramatic things that go on with characters that you've really loved and followed, but I definitely don't want to give away any names, especially if you're new to the show. I don't want to spoil this show for everyone, for anybody at all, because it's a very heavy, character-driven show that you get hooked on very, very intensely. This is before True Detective, before a lot of these other cop dramas going on, and NYPD Blue was here first, in the 90s, and it's a phenomenal show that still stands tall today. Really great writing in this one. This was, of course, created by Stephen Bochco, so, that checks out. It definitely great acting, great writing, great stories all around. As always with every season, there's some really great guest appearances in this one, and season 6 is no exception. You get some great appearances from people like Terrence Howard, you get Mos Def, Kevin Dillon, and Emile Hirsch, which is another amazing thing, very similar to things like Law & Order, where you know, these young up-and-coming actors kind of do these day spots or guest appearances in these law shows like NYPD Blue, Law and Order, so on and so forth. And then you kind of look back and, you know, how many people got their start on shows like this, and they're big, big stars now. So it's really cool to kind of pop on these old episodes, and you never really know who's going to pop up in each episode. So that's just, you know, a kind of a handful of people that you're going to find in Season 6. But like I said, Season 6 is a very, very intense season, a real turning point in the show that would go on for another handful of seasons, but definitely be made aware that this is a very, very intense one, and I dare not spoil anything that goes on in this one. But I really enjoy this season a lot. Definitely ups the ante really well, considering the cast members were being lost, but then, you know, of course, being replaced. So really, really good stuff. You know, again, great writing, great acting, and really cool guest appearances in this one. So if you love cop dramas and, you know, you're eternally grateful for Shout Factory for picking up the rights to the show after, you know, DVD releases of, you know, the later seasons kind of ceased operation, you're definitely going to want to pick this one up because, you know, of course, more sales can only increase the chances of seeing the entirety of the show released out on the DVD format. So, again, if you're a big fan of cop dramas and, you know, police procedural type shows, then NYPD Blue is definitely going to be up your alley. The complete 6th season is available right now from Shout Factory. Alrighty guys, and next up, available right now from Midnight Releasing, is the independently shot Scavenger Killers. Now, in this Bonnie and Clyde approach to the serial killer subgenre deals with a charming judge and a criminal defense attorney who go on a maniacal killing spree with a slew of FBI agents hot on their trail, but unfortunately for the FBI agents trying to crack the case, these two sadistic killers are changing up their methodology with every single kill that they take without, you know, having any pattern for the agents to trace them on, making the mystery all the harder to catch them. The short and sweet of this film is it's just not very good, frankly. It's an independently shot film with some few name faces in here, most notably Eric Roberts and Dustin Diamond from Saved by the Bell fame, and it's just not a very good film at all. The story, while the skeleton of it sounds very interesting, a you know, Bonnie and Clyde approach to the serial killer genre sounds very cool, the execution is very poor. You know, the low budget is kind of seen all over, and the very amateurish acting skills of the principal talent in this one is evident in every single scene. Now, one, you know, mere redeeming factor in this one is early on there are some really cool usage of practical effects, but even that gets, you know, very weathered with the onslaught of just, you know, this overusage of really, really awful CG gore effects, which really runs rampant throughout the majority of the runtime. Another thing with Scavenger Killers that really hurts it is the overlong runtime on this one. It runs about an hour and 40 minutes, and once you really get into the thicket of this thing and you kind of see the kind of, you know, budget and quality that we're dealing with, you learn very quickly that this kind of goes on way too long than it should. This film should have really settled at like an 80 to 85 minute runtime, but instead they really kind of get caught up in their own very dialogue heavy screenplay, and they just kind of make this story that could have been very fun had they, you know, really had, you know, a snappier screenplay to work with. They just kind of make the story far too convoluted for what kind of film this should be, and that just kind of makes the overall viewing experience not a very pleasant one. Another thing with this is the gore in this one and kind of the horrific, you know, murder sequences that you see in this one kind of tread very closely to the torture porn genre that was running rampant in the horror community a few years ago, but really overstayed its welcome very quickly, and you don't really see that type of film being made anymore in the horror community, and the majority of horror fans don't really enjoy it to begin with, so kind of seeing them kind of treading waters in this one just kind of feels a little late to the party, if you will. When I was seeing the imagery in this one, I couldn't help but feel like this was a film that they probably were trying to make a few years ago and didn't get it off the ground until, you know, relatively recently. So it just kind of feels a little dated in that respect. It's really surprising to see the amount of familiar faces that you do find in this one, and all it really screams is that a film like Scavenger Killers was merely a paycheck film for this. I mean, even some of the, you know, the more notable cast members like Eric Roberts, who of course is an Academy Award nominated actor, and who, you know, tends to tread in, you know, blockbuster franchises like The Expendables or even Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. He's an actor that kind of, you know, comes in and out of these independent horror productions pretty often. I think in 2014 alone, he has like well over 25 to 30 independent projects in and out of various stages of production. So he's really no stranger to the independent filmmaking world, but, you know, Scavenger Killers is definitely one of those paycheck roles for him, where his appearance in this one is very far and few between, and it's not a very memorable role. It doesn't really serve that much of a bearing to the storyline. Even Dustin Diamond's role, who he also plays another FBI agent who is really bizarre. He has a psychic ability that is only that can only be used when he's touching the breasts of an overweight African-American woman or sticking his fingers in her mouth. Furthermore, he goes through sporadic bouts of Tourette's syndrome, which kind of adds an even crazier, hokier side to his already bizarre character. So, for those being the two notable faces that you would recognize in this independent production, their appearance and their character traits are really off the wall and just painfully laughable, and not in a good way. You know, by the half-hour mark, I was really struggling to get through Scavenger Killers. There's just really nothing very redeeming to find in this film. It reeks of a low budget. Like I said, they get really caught up in their very dialogue-heavy screenplay, and it just seems like the work of, you know, an independent filmmaker that's kind of, you know, working his way out through his feature as it's being shot. So overall, didn't really have a great time with Scavenger Killers. I really couldn't have, you know, hoped for the film to be over any sooner than it was. But all that said, it does come with a few special features, although they're not very memorable ones. Two behind-the-scenes featurettes, one really focusing on the gore effects, and then you also have a third featurette that deals with the premiere of the film at the Hoboken Film Festival, because the film itself does take place in my great state of New Jersey, so yeah. But all that said, guys, I can't wildly recommend Scavenger Killers, as I just didn't have a very good time with it. The screenplay is really bad, the actors are amateurish at best, and even the more notable faces that you would recognize in this one are clearly just collecting a paycheck off of this film. So it's not a great film by any stretch of the imagination. Did not enjoy this one whatsoever, but for those of you that are still curious enough to check it out, it is available right now for midnight releasing. Alrighty guys, and next up, available July 15th from Lionsgate, available on Blu-ray and DVD, the Scarlett Johansson star, Under the Skin. Now, this is a film that's been on my radar for quite some time now. It's been gaining a lot of buzz in the film festival circuit, and tons of people have been praising Scarlett Johansson's tour de force performance found in it. But for those of you that aren't aware of Under the Skin, it of course stars Scarlett Johansson as an alien entity who takes over the persona of a female human being. Scouring the Scottish highways for unsuspecting males, and luring them in with her good looks and seduction, she draws them to secluded locations where she can further lure them into these otherworldly dimensions, where they of course meet their untimely demise. The more time that Scarlett Johansson's character spends inhabiting this human being, she develops more of a connection and an emotional attachment to the human being race, understanding the complexities and hardships that they go through, to the point where she really starts to identify herself as a human being. Now, like I said, tons of good buzz has been going on about Under the Skin, so I was really looking forward to it. First and foremost, this film is very abstract in its delivery. It doesn't rely on a lot of dialogue. In fact, it's very minimal in that department at best. It really more or less relies on the movement of the camera, the usage of effective music, and the overall physical performance of the principal talent that you find in this film. So, in that sense, the abstract nature feature of this film is pretty unique and really well done. Director Jonathan Glazer accomplishes some really nice camera work in this one. Previously to Under the Skin, he was responsible for such flicks like Sexy Beast and the Nicole Kidman star Birth, but I think that he accomplishes quite a lot in this one. The cinematography is really nice to look at. He gets some great performances out of people, most notably Scarlett Johansson, without really shoving a lot of dialogue at the audience. So in that respect, it's very unique in its delivery, and especially very unique against a lot of the science fiction films that have been seen in theaters the past few years. So that much it has a lot going for it is its uniqueness. Scarlett Johansson's performance, all the buzz that's been going on about it is very much warranted. This is a role that's unlike anything that she's done before. I mean, she's so well known and in the public eye now with her appearances in the Avengers, the Captain America films, and of course her work with Woody Allen. But her work in Under the Skin, again, very minimalist approach, but she accomplishes and achieves so much in her performance. That's saying a whole lot. It's all in her stares and her looks at the camera and her very uncomfortable, otherworldly personality, of course being an alien. I'm not sure if this is intentional or not, but I really like the costume choices that they used on her character. She, of course, is a beautiful-looking female in this film, but the costume, or the clothes that she's wearing in this one, feels very dated. It feels very 1980s against this modern world of Scotland that she's inhabiting. And it's very cool to see that contrast, because looks-wise, although she is a human in the human world, she looks very alien against other people. She's wearing a fur coat, these really washed-out jeans that scream 1980s, so I'm not sure if that was an intentional thing on the behalf of the director or whatnot, but I did like that. I just thought that it really added a really cool, subtle emphasis to her character. Music, like I said, is another very effective tool that director Jonathan Glazer uses to convey a lot in this one, and I liked the music a lot. I thought that it was very effective in the scenes that it was used in. It actually reminded me a little bit of Stanley Kubrick's music. I couldn't help but hear shades of The Shining in it, so it was very eerie, again, kind of dated, but I think it worked really good in the context of this film. Again, this is a very abstract film in its delivery, and while I praise it for its uniqueness, it's also the thing that kind of hurt the film for me. The film is very much a slow burn, without a lot in the way of dialogue, and really relying on, a very quiet runtime where you're kind of focusing on the performances and the camera work to guide you through this narrative. I was kind of hoping for a little bit more meat for me to chew on in that respect. I don't mean that as much of a negative criticism, just in the fact that it wasn't really up my alley. I would have appreciated a little bit more dialogue, a little bit more to really allow us to get into Scarlett Johansson's head without us having to rely on just, appreciating the visual side of the film, of which is very beautiful to look at. But I did really wish that there was a little bit more in the form of, a narrative dialogue where you kind of had some more dialect between the characters to really get inside their heads. Overall, the film, I think, is a decent time. I think that such high praise going into it, tons of people are calling this a masterpiece already. When you walk into a film like this with expectations like that, more times than not, they're always going to fall a little bit below your expectations. And in the case of Under the Skin, it did slightly underwhelm me. I wouldn't, by any stretch of the imagination, call this a masterpiece, but I do praise Jonathan Glazer's unique approach to the material, and I think that a lot of science fiction fans are going to take, are going to appreciate a lot to be found in this one, because compared to a lot of the other science fiction films that we've been seeing in the cinemas the past few years, Under the Skin definitely has something unique to say, and does it in a very abstract and really visually arresting way. All that said, Lionsgate does provide some pretty cool special features in this, including the Making of Under the Skin featurette, which is really broken down into 10 to 12 mini featurettes where it has director Jonathan Glazer and the cast talking about the various steps of the filmmaking process, ranging from the casting, the script, the music, the special effects as well, which is another unique thing considering the relatively low budget that this film had. when Scarlett Johansson lures these unsuspecting males, kind of seducing them, and kind of brings them to this otherworldly dimension where they meet their end, of course, for her benefit. It's done in a very unique way that I couldn't wrap my head around. I didn't know how it was done, but it was just really, really interesting and very hypnotic to watch unfold. It's very creepy at times, but that was definitely a very high selling point for me. While I did think the film overall was mediocre, the usage of the special effects in this one was really very unique, and I just don't understand how it was done, but very cool stuff to find in a relatively lower budgeted film like this one. So another cool high point for Under the Skin in that respect. But like I said, the special features are a cool thing to cut into, especially if you end up walking away enjoying Under the Skin more so than I did. But overall, it's definitely a unique science fiction film that I feel is going to leave quite a few people split down the middle, but I think the people that are, jonesing for something a little bit more abstract and a little bit more artistic in their science fiction film are going to find a lot to enjoy in Under the Skin. So if you guys are interested in that sort of thing, be sure to scoop it up when it becomes available July 15th from Lionsgate. Alrighty guys, and the final title that we're going to discuss in this week's episode of the Blu-ray DVD Weekly Wrap-Up is available right now from Wild Eye Releasing. It's the 20th Anniversary Special Edition of Invasion of the Scream Queens. Now, in this day and age where we're so privileged of seeing so many horror movie obscurities and cult movie and exploitation obscurities hitting DVD and Blu-ray on what seems like a weekly basis, it's really cool to see a documentary like this get released on the DVD format. This was made in the early 90s, circa 1991-1992, and it's Donald Farmer's documentary on Scream Queens at that time. He manages to sit down with a lot of relevant Scream Queens at that time, and many of which stayed in the business and have really kind of gone on as really iconic embodiments of what a Scream Queen is. He gets candid interviews with people like Michelle Bauer, Brink Stevens, Mary Warnoff, Melissa Moore, Camille Keaton, and a ton more to go around. This is a really cool documentary, and I'm really happy to have it in my collection because, at the time that it was made, it still was very relevant. The early 90s was kind of the last, curtain call, if you will, for, the very classic idea of a Scream Queen. So to have these, actresses speaking on camera about the roles that they've acted in, what they're currently working in on that time, the topic of nudity in the films, and the overall violence factor in the films, and how that, affects society, if it does at all, is really interesting. And looking back on it 20-somewhat years, later, this documentary serves as a really wonderful time capsule. Some of the interviews are really funny, they're very humorous, and some of them, kind of just seem like they're self-promoting their latest films at the time, which were obviously early 90s, probably direct-to-video efforts, but it's really all in good fun, and I really like seeing, a lot of these Scream Queens in their prime talking on camera about the things that, obviously are paying the bills for them at that time, and they still were very relevant. It was only, at least in my, upbringing, I kind of felt like it was a few short years after this where the whole 80s slasher boom was really, dead on arrival by the early 90s. So I feel like a few years after this one, horror was really in one of those ruts that they tend to go in every few years where nobody was interested anymore. The climate had really changed. They really rode that wave for as long as they could, but the horror genre in general was really kaput. So the timing of this documentary is really awesome to see because it was still a very relevant and booming, industry at the time where people were renting these things like crazy. There was very dedicated fan bases at the time, so I really like the time capsule nature that this documentary serves itself. And like I said, against all of the great and wonderful horror and exploitation titles that were treated to, on like what seems like a weekly basis, this is a really cool addition to add into your cult library just for the sheer time capsule nature of it and the very cool 90s captured interviews with so many of our favorite Scream Queens to have on here. This is, in fact, a 20th anniversary special edition, and there are some really great special features on this, including an interview from 2013 with director Donald Farmer that's well over an hour, and he talks about, his career shooting this documentary. Many of the people found in this one he knew personally, so it's a really cool and interesting conversation. There's also deleted interviews that run about 45 minutes, so there's a lot of things that were left on the cutting room floor, extended stuff, kind of, goofs that happen, so it's all right there for your viewing pleasure. You also get a photo gallery and an excerpt from the out-of-print Invasion of the Scream Queens book, so pretty packed for an early 90s Scream Queens documentary. So I think Wild Eye Releasing did a really good job on this one. It is important to note that the overall video quality on this one is really no different from the VHS of this film, probably back in the 90s. At least that's the way the presentation looks. It definitely looks like it's just been duped from a VHS. You encounter a lot of tracking lines and a lot of static hiss at times throughout this, because this looks like it was presumably shot with a video camcorder in the early 90s, but I think that really adds to the overall charm of the viewing experience in this one. But I think it was important to note on that one. But it's a really reasonably priced documentary, and one that I would highly recommend if you're a fan of the horror genre and the Scream Queens found in this one. I think that, you're not going to be disappointed with what you're going to find in this one. So be sure to scoop it up. It's available right now from Wild Eye Releasing. And that's going to wrap up this week's installment of the Blu-ray DVD Weekly Wrap-Up. As always, guys, thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to stay subscribed to the YouTube channel, and make sure to like the Mike's Pop Culture Playhouse Facebook page to stay up to date in all my latest reviews and all the latest movie news. And also, head on over to mikespopculture.com to catch up on all of my more recent written reviews, of which there are a ton, including Severin Films' recent Blu-ray releases for The Baby, Bloody Moon, and Bloody Birthday. And also, stay tuned to the website over the course of the next few weeks, because we're going to have a ton of new and exciting reviews, including The Legend of Billie Jean, the Ferris Fair edition on Blu-ray for the first time, as well as The Last Action Hero, Flatliners, and Anaconda, all coming from Mill Creek Entertainment. Plus, we're going to have reviews for Nymphomaniac Volumes 1 and 2 and Stage Fright. All this and tons more, so be sure to stay tuned to Mike's Pop Culture Playhouse for all the latest. Thanks again for tuning in.